This channel is sponsored by Truefire, and for the next few days they're running a buy one get one free promotion. So this means that if there was any particular course that you were looking at grabbing on Truefire, you can get one and get another free. I don't really need to explain to you what buy one get one free means, do I? Follow the links in the description, and yeah, Truefire, thanks for sponsoring the channel. My first electric guitar had an Ibanez on the headstock. Now it's partly for that reason I think this has been a really important brand for me in terms of guitar brands that I attach any sort of nostalgia to. But I was watching Keith from fivewattworld's video on the short history of Ibanez, and honestly it was like I've watched loads of episodes of Keith's stuff, watched loads of guitar-based things, and I've never had quite the amount of nostalgia that I felt when I was watching that video. So I wanted to do like a little bit of a video thinking about my history with Ibanez, why I don't really play any Ibanez guitars anymore except for this one, and talk about, I think, the importance of Ibanez and how I see them and that sort of stuff. I'm wearing a Japanese watch right now for Keith because I know he's into watches. This is a Seiko, who are a brand, I think Japanese, right, that started off sort of copying and then grew into something a bit different, which is kind of what Ibanez to me have been. And I guess start the video as I mean to go on, which is essentially, if you think about like a Fender or a Gibson, is there any iconic model that's come out since the 60s, the 50s? Can you think of one? And you might be able to, but feel free to leave them in the comments if you have. Certainly like 70s and 80s, and let folks know what you think that Fender and Gibson have done that has kind of become legendary or iconic. And then, in the same way, when I think of Ibanez and when I think of models that have come out in that period of time, to me, I feel like, pound for pound, it's almost Ibanez have been pushing things forward, you know, the RG, latterly, like recently, the AZ. I can't really think of a company that has done, like, they got bangers, do you know what I mean? So by the way, if you liked the introduction backing track, or when you saw in the fivewattworld video I was playing an Ibanez RG, there's actually a full transcription tier on Patreon if you're at all interested, where for £5 a month you can get access to a few full transcriptions. I think there might be 12, 13, 14, something like that, because I've been doing it for just around a year. So if you want the full transcription that runs along with the video and the backing track, you know, Guitar Pro music or PDF, then that's a way you can do that if you do happen to like some of these instructions and you think, I want to learn some of those. My history with Ibanez, it starts off, I buy this guitar. My dad is a guitarist as well, acoustic guitar mainly. So I started playing like an Encore nylon guitar, which I got for my 8th birthday. I learnt this D chord and this G chord. It was a Sunday. And then probably this A chord. I was just playing on these bottom 3 strings. Acoustic, you know, nylon guitar took me a little while. I was very interested in playing it. I was playing piano as well, but the guitar kind of was what I was more interested in. I used to stick my head up close to the acoustic guitar, and when I play it like this, I'd be like, that sounds like an electric. Eventually, it felt like a longer time to me at the time, obviously, but I guess it might have been a year or 2. I ended up getting this Ibanez Roadstar. So this is one of the models that, at the time, you know, I just grabbed it because it was a £100 guitar, and my dad was like, Ibanez, they're good things for the money. Even back then, I think that was kind of the reputation of Japanese-built stuff. So this would have been like 99, something like that. And at the time, Dad also held Tokai guitars in like pretty high esteem as well. So yeah, and Echo, I think, although Echo might have been Italian, I don't know. Anyway, so grab this guitar. And this is the guitar that I essentially learned to play on, self-taught, right? So I didn't have any other sort of like guitar teacher influence to say, look, these are the guitars that are really good. I basically ruined this guitar, right? It's only John Martin recently got it back up together to be very, very playable. Send him an email if you're in the area and looking for some work on your guitars. And so I then got into, fairly quickly, Thin Lizzy, from there Iron Maiden, and from there the slippery slope led down to the prog rabbit hole. And so I got into Dream Theater, heavier styles of music, and I got an Ibanez RG7620. I guess I was into Korn as well, which is probably why I ended up with an RG7620. One came up for sale nearby, £400. Still haven't.
That's not true. I've seen the Route 1 video. Seems like those turning off.
More people than have ever come to my gigs these days. Here we are then. And I would have guessed that I was maybe 11, 12, 13, that sort of age range, maybe something like that when I got this Ibanez RG 7620. And that was the guitar that I did an awful lot of playing on. I can also remember that I went to Manson's and I bought an Ibanez SZ320, which was more like the, is it Mike Mushok from Stained? He had a 6 string. with a sort of tailpiece. This was in Keith's video, by the way, and I was like, I had one of them. So it was black, string through the body. That was an interesting guitar as well. So at some point then, so my whole childhood playing these guitars basically, I think it must have been G3, which kind of woke me up to this idea that actually there are these other guitars. Because, you know, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Paul Gilbert, a lot of the guys that I grew up listening to, Korn, I mean, Slipknot had BC Riches, but didn't one of them also play an Ibanez at one point? Yeah, they both played Ibanez at some point, and definitely play Ibanez now, right? So it was kind of like a whole bunch of my childhood was like Ibanez guitars being kind of the thing, like new metal as well. Yeah, definitely. So then G3, I kind of saw Eric Johnson there and playing Manhattan, and seeing him playing a Strat and an ES335 kind of, I think, woke up something else. And also George Benson, another Ibanez artist, and Pat Metheny, another Ibanez artist. And this is kind of why I think, like, all through that Keith video, I'm like, like I'm getting flashbacks to the stuff that was important to me. So I think it was Feel Like Making Love was the first George Benson tune that I heard, which had this banging like jazz run, and that's why I kind of started getting into jazz and watching the Petrucci forums. I was seeing that people saying like Pat Metheny, Aldi Meola, George Benson are some of these guys that you need to check out. And this was before YouTube, but I would go on to like Kazaa or LimeWire and download some of these tunes and start listening to them and learning them. Then, because I was into John Petrucci, I think I got turned on to this idea of Music Man, and I bought I think these are probably the first guitars that I bought that were not Ibanez. Up to that point, from what I can remember, it was an Ibanez Roadstar, an Ibanez RG7620, a Ibanez SZ320, and I bought a fixed bridge Ibanez 7421, I think it would have been, a black one. And yeah, I think the first guitar that I might have bought that was not an Ibanez would have been this Music Man Silhouette. I think I paid about £800 for it used. That had Damasio pickups in it. And I had this idea that maybe it would sound a bit more stratty, I think. And then I also bought a Sub 1. But at university, in Bath Spa, my mate Pete Oddy had a Fender Strat. And I heard him playing the Fender Strat. And I was like, actually, this is the sound that I'm starting to really dig. And I think that turned me away from the Ibanez models, because to me what the Ibanez sort of represented in my head at that time was more or less like pointy instruments. My buddy Jack Skuse at uni, he like played a Gem at the time, an Ibanez Gem, and it was kind of like one of the floral ones, and you kind of had it in mind that these were not the most versatile instruments, and they sort of became almost like a little bit of a unfashionable sort of thing, would be, I guess, the kind way to put it, where it's like, well, he's shown up with a Floyd Rose and a locking nut. What are people going to think? That's kind of what happened to some extent, right? And then also, I bought a G&L Legacy, which got me kind of in the Strat zone. Then I played that for a while. I had two G&L Legacies, and then got into a band that were kind of on the verge of being signed, we kind of thought, because it turned out that every label hated our manager, and because he was a cokehead knobhead. Anyway, he basically said that you need to be playing a black guitar, not a white. I had a white G&L Legacy, so I ended up buying a Fender Roadworn Strat, and from there I guess my tastes have gone more towards like a straightforward sort of Strat. But also there was this little intervening period, like I kind of alluded to, where I got into jazz, and my first experience, I put some flat wound on a Music Man Sub 1, and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, like trying to see if I could get myself into the jazz hole that way. And then I bought an Ibanez PM35. This would have been just after uni, I think, and that was a really, really great guitar, just because when I picked it up, it was like, well, I can only play jazz on this thing. And this is kind of the thing. Then there's like some semi-hollow Ibanez guitars that I'd had over the years, like the Art Star Vintage, which was like a relic Ibanez, which they're not that many relic Ibanez things around. I also remember, I think a buddy of mine at uni had one of the really nice Artcore sort of semi-hollow guitars, Ollie. And it's just one of those things where actually, when I look back, like there is an Ibanez for pretty much every occasion. And if I had to pick sort of one company that kind of covered pretty much every realm of what I've been interested in guitar-wise, it is Ibanez. Like from the shred stuff, the jazz fusion stuff, whether it's Schofield or Pat Metheny or George Benson or Joe Pass. The one thing that is kind of missing is like an obvious sort of Strat thing, because it's a little bit super stratty or a little bit jazzy. There's like that little bit of a gap in the middle. So that, for me, I think that's the gap that has meant that I have ended up not playing Ibanez guitars really anymore, is because the Strat and the Tele hole are not particularly well filled by Ibanez, is kind of, I guess, what I've thought. Now, talking of sort of this innovation stuff a little bit, I said earlier, like, I can't really think of a guitar from Fender or Gibson in that post sort of 50s, 60s golden era where they brought out a thing when you're like, well, that's iconic, or that's become iconic. And I could be totally blanking on something, obviously, so in the comments, hopefully some people might have thought of one or two of them. But for me, like the Ibanez RG, the Ibanez S, which kind of came the Joe Satriani thing as well, like the same sort of thing. Like the various hollow body Ibanezes, which maybe not one of them in and of itself, but together with George Benson, Pat Metheny and John Schofield, like that's three sort of, at the time, contemporary jazz artists that were using Ibanez guitars and kind of at the forefront of it. That I think an Ibanez hollow body, like as a whole, kind of then becomes iconic. The Talman was the one guitar that I felt like I could get on with that would do some of the more classic-y things, like more Strat sounds, but I think they discontinued it. There was a Talman Prestige for a while, which was kind of a straightforward 3 single coil thing. But in any case, I think the reasons that I kind of turned off of Ibanez in general, I've gone away from Floyd Rose pretty hard because I kind of got really fed up. My Ibanez RG7620 was like my recording guitar, but it just took not very much for it to kind of knock out a tune, and you had to kind of figure out, well, if I tune this bit, then this bit, then this bit. In general, I don't think that really suited me looking back. And I'm much happier with a more vintage style trem. Although you can't do the same sorts of things, I think stability wise, it just feels more stable. Whereas like a Floyd Rose, if you get someone who can set them up well, like my buddy Dr. Chris Elphick can, then they can be stable. But at the same time, it's like a lot of moving parts. And to me, in some ways, like a normal sort of Fender style bridge is a little bit more dependable in some ways. What else? I think humbuckers I kind of steered away from, just preferring like the sound and characteristic of single coil guitars. And so yeah, the Ibanez AZ came along relatively recently, and I think this is almost close to the sort of guitar that I could play going forward. And that's kind of got like a little bit of the single coil vibe. So that was Martin Miller and Tom Quayle were quite instrumental in designing those guitars, and I think they must have been a really big hit for Ibanez. They also came out with the Ibanez kind of Tele variant, which these are kind of a little bit, I think, filling the gap of Sir a little bit rather than Fender, because they're a little bit super-ish. So that for me kind of wraps it up, I think, a little bit. I stopped playing Ibanez guitars just because I've gone to more of a Strat or Tele type situation, or a Les Paul, and I don't know exactly why, because it's still those same guitarists like Pat Metheny or Alan Holdsworth as an Ibanez player at one point, right? But maybe it's one of those weird things where, you know, like some people say they don't play a Strat because all of their heroes played them or whatever, where it's actually like quite a lot of my heroes, except for Eric Johnson, didn't really play a Strat. Maybe most of them played an Ibanez, and maybe that's why I've ended up steering away from them a bit. Anyway, it was just like a little bit of a trip down memory lane for me, because it was just so many cool guitars that I saw pop up that I was like, I used to spend hours just like looking on the Ibanez.co.uk website, or even trying to look at like the Ibanez Japan website to see what they had access to over there we don't have over here. Also, you know, think about things that Fender and Gibson have, I don't think, ever done, like whether it's using things like Fishman Fluence pickups recently, like which guitars have more stainless frets. I think Ibanez, pound for pound, and then, you know, things like pushing the boat out, like headless guitars, which to me is like a little bit of Ibanez for me is like the RG. The headless stuff to me, I guess I don't have any nostalgic feelings towards that stuff, so it kind of looks like Ibanez are going on doing their own thing. But I guess that's what innovation should kind of look like if you're someone that's now like grown up and seen the guitars that Ibanez used to make. The ones that they're making now should, I guess, be kind of different. Otherwise, it kind of shows that they've stayed fairly stagnant, I guess. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. What are your favourite Ibanez guitars? What have I missed that would be an Ibanez guitar that really suits me? Like the Ibanez GS 1200 of Tony from up the roads. I really like that guitar. This Roadstar is absolutely cracking now that John's sorted it. It's got some Monty single coil pickups in there. Some of those guitars, the RGs that I played over the years, you know, I've got fond memories of playing them, and it doesn't sound like I'm struggling on them either, relative to other guitars. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. That's the other thing. I've kind of gone away from a flat radius, thin neck to slightly chunkier neck with a rounder radius. Things change.